My friends saw me that I was in a bad mood, and I needed a vacation in a beautiful place with a lot of history. So they told me, "Go to Brasov. It will be fun. You will have a lot of beautiful moments with a lot of history," they said. So, I went. My journey to Brasov, Romania, was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to immerse myself in the rich history and breathtaking landscapes of the Carpathian Mountains. I'd always been drawn to places with storied pasts, and Brasov, with its medieval architecture and legends of Vlad the Impaler, seemed like the perfect destination. I arrived in Brasov on a crisp autumn evening. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of fallen leaves. My accommodation was a charming old guest house just outside the city center. A short walk from the Black Church and the guest house, a centuries-old building with creaking wooden floors and ivy-covered walls, was everything I had hoped for. The first few days were magical. I explored the narrow cobblestone streets, visited the ancient fortress on Mount Tampa, and even took a day trip to Bran Castle, often linked with the Dracula legend. However, it was on my fourth night that things took a dark turn. That evening, I decided to take a walk through the nearby forest. The guest house owner, a kind old woman named Anna, had warned me not to venture too far after dark, but I was enticed by the beauty of the moonlit woods. With my flashlight in hand, I set off on a well-trodden path. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, and the path became less distinct. The sounds of the city faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt a strange sense of tranquility mixed with a slight unease that I couldn't quite shake. After about an hour of walking, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were broken, and the door hung ajar, creaking in the gentle breeze. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. I approached the cabin cautiously, shining my flashlight through the doorway. Inside, the air was musty, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. It looked as though no one had set foot in there for decades. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. There was little of interest in the main room, just some broken furniture and tattered curtains. But then, I noticed a trapdoor in the corner. It was partially hidden under a rotting rug, as if someone had tried to conceal it. My heart pounded as I lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Against my better judgment, I decided to explore further. I descended the stairs slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and jars containing unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it lay an ancient-looking book bound in dark leather. As I approached the table, a sudden chill ran down my spine. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, and I felt as though I was being watched. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I opened the book, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and drawings of grotesque creatures. It looked like some sort of ancient grimoire. Suddenly I heard a whisper, so faint I could barely make out the words. "Leave this place." I spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, and the feeling of being watched intensified. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Then, I saw it. A shadowy figure, barely discernible, standing at the edge of the room. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it seemed to beckon me closer. "Leave." No. The voice was louder this time, more insistent. I didn't need to be told again. I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. I raced out of the cabin and through the forest, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the guest house, I was out of breath and shaking. Anna was waiting for me at the door, a concerned look on her face. "You went into the forest, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, too shaken to speak. "There's a reason I told you not to go there after dark," she continued. "That cabin, it has a dark history. Many have entered, but not all have returned. The spirits there are restless, trapped between our world and the next." I spent the rest of the night wide awake, haunted by the memories of what I had seen. The next morning, I packed my bags and left Brasov, eager to put as much distance between myself and that cursed forest as possible. Years later, I found myself back in Romania, this time on a business trip. My schedule brought me close to Brasov once again, and memories I had tried to bury resurfaced. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and unfinished business, I decided to visit the old guest house again. The guest house looked almost unchanged, a little more weathered perhaps, but still standing. Anna greeted me warmly, seemingly unaged by the passing years. We spoke briefly about my previous visit, and she mentioned the forest with a wary look in her eyes. "Do you still warn guests about the cabin?" I asked. "Always," she replied, "but not everyone listens." Despite her warnings, I felt a strange compulsion to revisit the cabin. I convinced myself that it was for closure, to face my fears and put them to rest once and for all. That evening, I found myself walking the same path into the forest, the memories of my last visit playing in my mind. The forest was just as I remembered it, eerily quiet and densely packed with trees. I followed the path to the clearing, and there it was, the cabin, looking even more decrepit than before. The door still hung ajar, and I felt the same mix of dread and curiosity as I approached. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking ominously. The trap door was still there, partially covered by the same rotting rug. I hesitated for a moment, but the urge to uncover the mystery drew me in. I lifted the trap door and descended the narrow staircase once more. The basement room was just as I had left it, the air thick with an oppressive cold. The old wooden table stood in the center, the ancient book still resting on it. I approached cautiously, my flashlight flickering as before. This time I felt more prepared, though the fear was no less intense. I opened the book again, skimming through the pages filled with strange symbols and grotesque drawings. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Help us." The voice was clearer now, and I realized it wasn't a demand but a plea. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the shadowy figure. The air grew colder, and the oppressive feeling intensified. The figure appeared again, its eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. "Help us," it whispered, its voice filled with desperation. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Free us," it replied. "We are trapped by the curse." I didn't understand, but I knew I needed more information. I flipped through the book, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. Then, I found a page with a drawing of the cabin and the surrounding forest. It was a map, and there was a marked spot not far from where I stood. "I'll help you," I said, determined. "Tell me what to do." The figure pointed to the map, then to a shelf lined with jars. One jar in particular seemed to glow faintly. I picked it up, noticing that it was filled with a strange, dark liquid. "Take it." To the marked spot, the figure instructed. I left the cabin carrying the jar and the book. The path on the map led me deeper into the forest, to a place where the trees grew even denser. It was almost completely dark by the time I arrived at the marked spot, a small, overgrown clearing with a stone altar in the center. I placed the jar on the altar and opened it. The dark liquid inside seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Following the instructions in the book, I poured the liquid over the altar and recited the incantation written on the page. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and a chilling wind swept through the clearing. The oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a sense of release and relief. The whispers grew louder, then faded away, leaving only silence. As the wind died down, I saw the shadowy figure standing before me. Its features were clearer now, and it looked almost human. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice filled with gratitude. "We are free." The figure slowly faded away, and the forest grew quiet once more. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. The spirits had been freed, and the curse broken. I made my way back to the guest house, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Anna was waiting for me, a knowing look on her face. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "You've done a great thing," she said. "The spirits can finally rest." I spent the rest of the night reflecting on the experience. The next morning, I said my goodbyes to Anna and left Brasov, this time feeling a sense of closure. The memories of that cursed cabin and the haunted forest would stay with me forever, but I knew I had done my part to set things right. Years passed, and life carried on. The experience in Brasov became a distant memory, something I would occasionally recount to friends over a drink. But deep down, I knew that I had been a part of something much larger than myself, a story that had spanned centuries, and I had helped to bring it to a close. One day I received a letter in the mail. It was from Anna, written in her neat, old-fashioned script. She thanked me once again for what I had done and mentioned that the forest had grown quiet, the spirits at peace at last. She invited me to visit any time, to see the forest as it was meant to be, serene and untouched by darkness. I decided to take her up on the offer. Returning to Brasov felt like coming full circle, a chance to see the place that had changed my life. When I arrived, the forest was indeed peaceful, the oppressive atmosphere completely gone. The cabin had collapsed, reclaimed by nature, and the stone altar was covered in moss and flowers. As I stood in the clearing, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had faced my fears and helped bring peace to a place long haunted by its past. And in doing so, I had found a kind of peace within myself as well. Leaving the forest, I made my way back to the guest house. Anna greeted me with a warm smile, and we spent the evening talking about the past and the present. The shadows of Brasov had finally been laid to rest, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. So my friends were right about this place that has a lot of history, but little they knew. Also, in the end, just don't forget, it wasn't just a puppy, so you better click that subscribe button.